so that those who wanted to join us today but didn't have a chance to can see the recording on the AFC Academy of Law YouTube channel. I won't take much time. I would like to just introduce our today's speaker, Mr. Ishaq Burney. He is a managing director and chief legal officer of the Astana Financial Services Authority. And today we'll be talking about managing multicultural legal teams and namely his experience as a CLO. Mr. Burney, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen? Can you see my presentation?
Yep, we do, but not the full screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that better?
No, we are actually not the big screen.
Mm-hmm. Let me try. No?
I can still see the smaller screen.
Perhaps we, given that I'm somewhat technologically challenged, perhaps we, just go on the basis of that, and then see how we go along.
Okay.
Well, welcome, everyone. I mean, my name is Ishaq Burney. A lot of people call me Izzy as well, which again is somewhat of a cultural construct, and there is a background as to why that particular nickname became my name in most professional circles as well. Just a quick brief about the topic. So when I was asked to actually speak today, I mean, there was an overwhelming propensity on my part to actually just rehash an AFSA presentation on how wonderful and lovely the Astana International Financial Center is, which it is. But I thought that, perhaps it might be, given that this is an English speaking club, we might talk about something a little bit off the beaten track. And that is, the management of multicultural, or shall we say diverse. Now, I know that, the session was advertised as, being management of multicultural teams. But I think in itself, it actually raises a bit of an English conundrum, because, the concept of diversity is, I think, much broader than the concept of multiculturalism. And I think also that changes the relevance of how the term multiculturalism or diversity is seen in different countries. For example, the definition of what diversity or multiculturalism might be viewed as, for example, say, for example, Australia or United States or UK, might differ a little bit from how it might be perceived, for example, in Kazakhstan. So I thought that, that would be good at the outside to recognize. The second thing, I think this is more of a caveat that, because I'm sort of presenting this in my personal capacity as Ishaq Burney, also known as Izzy, and not as the chief legal officer of AFSA. By all means, given that, I hope that we progress on Chatham House rules. We have an open discussion about some of these issues, and these are not necessarily the views of, the Astana Financial Services Authority per se. A second aspect is that I think it's very important to construe this in the right perspective, because certainly it is neither encouraged nor a very good idea to pigeonhole people you work with or people you deal with into particular cultural constructs or personality types or particular skill set groups. I think it's very important to have an open mind about the people you work with. It's always a good idea to know a little bit more about them, and avoid the pitfall of pigeonholing, or in other words, fitting people in particular windows and just only viewing them with that light. Again, this is something that, I also personally perceive that, when I came from a mixed cultural background, spent a lot of my formative years in Australia and Pakistan. And then, I preferred that, when I started my professional career, that people take me and judge me on my professional ability rather than, whatever preconceived notions they might have about what I might say or what I might do or how I might behave, or, whether I was hot-tempered or whether I was mellow yellow. I preferred that, people just take me on face value of, what my professional skills were. However, with time and with the benefit of having managed many a team and being part of many a team over the years, I do realize that sometimes it's important to have a little bit of empathy and a bit of understanding of other people's particular diversity viewpoints, which are important to managing effective teams and also delivering successful outcomes. Another aspect that I wanted to want to say is, I think it's also important in that construct never to judge a book by its cover, because it so happens that, sometimes I feel that, when I sort of go and interact with the broader populace, sometimes the audio and the video don't match. What people, when they see me, expect from me, perhaps might be what might be forthcoming when I open my mouth. So, that is another something that, you need to be aware of and appreciate in interacting with, the broader world. Now, just a little bit about myself. So I lay the groundwork. I'm currently the Managing Director and Chief Legal Officer of the Astana Financial Services Authority. In that, I look after legal, policy, strategy, and our external relations aspects as well of the financial center. I've been in the profession of law for over 2 decades. But I actually started my life out trying to be a finance professional. And, I worked for a large global multinational company and trained as a finance professional first. And once I did that, I actually realized that, perhaps my real calling in life was more towards law. And then I went and did the necessary work experience at a law firm to get my license. And then I joined the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, which is the regulator in Australia. Now, that is a very, very big organization, has about 3,000 people. It is has offices in all the major states in Australia. So needless to say that, and then when you start work, you also get exposed to people from different backgrounds. Australia is an extremely multicultural society, and you come across people from diverse professional backgrounds. And some people might be accountants, some people might be former army officers, some people might be former, police officers, investigators, accountants, lawyers, And in that construct, you again, learn how to deal and work with other people from, both cultural and, multinationalism and also internationalism and professional diversity. And of course, there's all, matters of gender, which become important there as well. Along the way, then, I worked for a large energy conglomerate, and then got asked by some former colleagues and bosses who I worked with, who had moved out to Qatar to start the Qatar Financial Center, to move to Qatar and work on the establishment and launch of the Qatar Financial Center. So there I stayed for about 11 odd years, and last 6 years as the Group General Counsel of the Qatar Financial Center. And in that process, got to learn a completely different set of skills. So, what I had not appreciated is like, how much, appreciation for the other side and empathy for people you work with becomes material in a place like Qatar and Dubai and the Middle East, because the Middle East is extremely multicultural. The team that I was involved in the general counsel of for about 6 years had people from 10 different jurisdictions admitted as lawyers in 10 different jurisdictions. Now, the challenge there was that, unlike, for example, in Australia, where people are trained a particular way, there is a natural pathway on how you end up getting a job at, like, a very good employer like ASIC. You need to have all the right schools, perhaps, and, right set of skills. And so there is a little bit of cohesion in the professional culture that automatically is built into the bias of, like, who's walking in through the door into the employer. Now, in the Middle East, you can imagine that, with lawyers admitted in 10 different jurisdictions, a person who trained and grew up in America or trained and grew up in UK might have completely different set of skills and training compared to, say, for example, another person who was trained in India or Philippines. And then when you put all of them together, the major challenge is, how do you achieve successful outcomes with them along the way? And in that sense, I think it was very much a learning exercise for myself and many of the people that I worked with as well. You also learn that, for example, I mean, I remember one person who was also from a Middle Eastern country, and they were trained in another country. And we had another person from the same Middle East country, but they were trained in that particular country. And how they sort of interacted with each other and worked professionally was quite different. And so you had to really understand the value of training that brings to the way that people work in a professional environment. So it's not always about, like, where people are from or what sort of, their background might be from that perspective. I think training is a key aspect that can somehow change people's biases and sort of build, like, build towards a common corporate culture. So the challenge in the Middle East was really working towards a common corporate goal and how to sell that to, like, a very diverse team. So it was more the fact that people came from different places, and you had to build, like, a common goal, get everyone excited about it, and subscribe to that view, in terms of deliverables and outcomes, right? And then about 1.5 years ago, I moved across to the Astana Financial Services Authority. So, I do have, some ancestry from Kazakhstan, completely, unrelated information. But, and that had sort of always wanted me a little bit to learn about Kazakhstan and find out about Central Asia and be interested here. But the opportunity to be here actually made me realize that now I have a new set of cultural skills that I have to learn. I have a new set of, like, appreciation that I have to develop with, like, how to work with other people around me. And if you can think of it in this way, in some respects, the challenge is a little bit different from what, for example, it was in Middle East, because it is more the team is largely homogenous, given that, there is a certain limitations in terms of how many expats can work in government jobs and situations like that. So the team is a little bit more homogenous, and how to actually bring appreciation for other culture and diversities back to them. So instead of, like, my previous challenge, where it was to actually bring people together from different backgrounds to actually appreciate a common goal, here the common goal is more or less there. It's more the, trying to bring in some best practices from international cultures and diversity into the team, which is, the challenge here. And what do you need to do that? You need buy-in from people who are, because I can tell you pretty much, like, no change forced on staff ever is successful from that perspective. I think it requires, like, people to actually subscribe and buy into and see the value and the trade-off that involves to be able to subscribe to those views. Now, this a bit about myself was a complete cut paste from our website. like, this is what it says about me over there. But like, the point that I wanted to make over there is that that profile actually does not tell you a lot about me. Like, it tells you a little bit about me as a professional and what I've done from, like, my life perspective, and where I might have worked, where I might have studied, what professional associations, for example, I might have taken part in. But it doesn't actually tell you a lot about, like, what sort of culture that I subscribe to. I mean, from a corporate perspective, and also from a personal perspective. It also doesn't tell you, much about, for example, the kind of economic background that I came from, or where I might be at the moment. I mean, you can make assumptions about it, but those things are matters which can cause diversity in teams, and it's an important point to appreciate that that is also a driver. Then, it doesn't tell you about what sort of belief structure I have. I might believe that, the earth is flat, and, I have a firm view about that. And that might actually inform, you about, like, what kind of views I might have, for example, the doctrine of incorporation of common law principles in civil law, or, the admissibility of, like, particular types of evidence in interim injunctions. But it doesn't actually give you that perspective in it. And that's where I'm trying to, like, the point that I'm trying to make over there is that people's CVs and, their resumes and what profiles you read about them often don't really tell you much about the real kind of person that they are. And also, like, it doesn't, so for example, tell you that, for some reason, I don't know whether it was a personality trait, or, I just happened to be around at all the wrong points in time. But in Australia, like, I got made responsible for being the, the harassment and conduct officer at ASIC. And, post-Christmas parties, it used to be one of the most dreaded jobs, like, you can imagine. And then, somehow I retained that along the way. So I have never quite managed to figure it out, but there is some sort of element of why I particularly get singled out for this. But I got to Qatar, and, again, boom, like, can you also be conduct advisor, like, as well. So I had to do it over there in Qatar. And you can see that, the problems that sort of emanate in Qatar were a little bit different to what used to happen in Australia. But in the process, I sort of also realized, the importance of appreciation and empathy for, the issues of diversity in communication. Because often a lot of problems that used to be from poor communication, which got misunderstood or didn't perhaps, like, get put in the right construct. So I think that sort of helped me develop an appreciation for the importance of this aspect in management styles as well. I mean, you can read how I write, but perhaps it doesn't really tell you much about how I speak, or, what my communication style is, whether I'm a very direct person or whether I'm a very indirect person. And a bit about that a bit later. It doesn't tell you whether I'm a coffee drinker or a tea drinker. And that might be important, for example, if, like, I'm attending a meeting at certain listening, and I just absolutely don't like coffee, and someone serves me coffee, and, it might impact my mood at that particular meeting as well. And these are small little things, but I think it is important to have an appreciation for these things in the way that you interact with people, in the way that you work with people, in the way you manage people. Not only does it show empathy to the other side, it actually also gives you an opportunity to interact with them. What it also doesn't tell you is about what motivates me. Like, you can see that perhaps, like, I've been to a few universities and probably did well in university, or, I, tend to gravitate towards legal issues. But I think unless sort of you meet the person and you see them in action, sometimes it's very difficult to actually predict what might motivate me. And this is a pitfall that I've fallen in many times in myself. Like, for example, like, a particular individual, I used to think that, you know, the fact that, you know, they get a good bonus at the end of the year is sufficient reward, and you know, they would be very, you know, happy about that. But actually with time, I realized that I was actually pulling completely the wrong string there. And what actually motivated that person was an opportunity to actually do more challenging work. And for them, that was a much bigger reward, you know, than the fact that, you know, I considered that, you know, they got a sufficient amount of bonus at the end of the year to be so. And these are things that, you know, you only understand after sort of knowing the person a little bit better. I think we'll just have a little bit of discussion about some of these other topics a little bit more. But I think it is also important to have an appreciation for how much does it really matter. Because I think from a corporate perspective, I mean, you have a corporate culture, you have a corporate identity, and you have some corporate goals. And really, from that perspective, you're trying to sell those corporate goals for buy-in to your stakeholders, be it your employees or be it people you work with, like, you know, at the organization, or people you have to advise as lawyers. So I think it is important to have that appreciation as to, like, you know, how much does it really matter? I think it is important to have an appreciation, empathy, don't pigeonhole, but at the same time, like, you know, have a view on the broader corporate culture and, you know, the corporate achievables of the organization. And it is also important to have an empathy for people's personal factors and you know, but at the same time, maintaining corporate etiquette and be fair to people, you know. Okay, some sources of diversity, like, you know, I mean, when we talk about this concept of diversity, I mean, what are some of the things that can cause and for this, like, you know, I'm very involved with the Association for Corporate Counsel. I used to be a Middle East board representative as well. You know, they have a big annual meeting every year. About 3,000-4,000 lawyers actually come to that annual meeting. Next one is in October, and if any of you are interested in Association for Corporate Counsel, please by all means become members, and just by way of, like, you know, a little bit of incentive, like, you know, the next meeting is actually in Las Vegas. So you know, if any of that, like, you know, strikes a fancy, then please by all means do get involved. But I do remember that, you know, a few years ago, someone at the ACC was actually talking about this topic. So some of the issues, like, you know, that Maria Pernis actually identified in her presentation that can cause, like, you know, or lead to diversity, are things like, you know, your social category differences, for example, your race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, your sexual orientation, your physical abilities, like, you know, all these things play, you know, important roles in being sources of diversity amongst people. There's also a difference in knowledge and skills. Now, this from professional perspective is very important, because professional diversity, I think, is absolutely critical to achieving an effective team. You know, both from, you know, the amount of time that people have been working for, the amount of time that, you know, and where they've had their training. As I gave an example previously, like, you know, two people from the same country, but if trained in different countries, in my experience, act and work in completely different manners compared. So it's not about really that much about nationality or ethnic origin. It's more about where people are trained. And I think training can alter behaviors of people significantly. You know, the difference in value and belief structure, I think that's also very important to appreciate, like, you know, the cultural background, ideological beliefs, like, you know, also personality difference between people, like, you know, I mean, what cognitive style that they might have, you know, effective disposition. I remember doing an organizational behavior course as part of my postgrad, you know, at Oxford. And I remember there was, like, you know, some charts that were put up to us. And quite interestingly, it had charted, like, you know, who are, for example, the most direct communicators. And it was statistically shown in that paper that, for example, people from United States, Australia, and Russia, I remember, are very direct communicators. Like, you know, they would just blurt it out, right? And people from other cultures, in particular United Kingdom, are more cautious, like, you know, or slightly more indirect in communication, and particularly when it comes to feedback. Now, I don't know if that is true because I've met some pretty direct people from UK over the years, particularly some QCs. But at the same time, I think there appears to be some statistical relevance of that information. I, for one, I used to have a boss. He was trained at Cambridge, very, very experienced lawyer, one of the best lawyers I have ever worked with. And my biggest challenge in working with him the whole time I worked with him was actually trying to understand what he really was telling me sometimes. Because, if someone tells you this is not very good, there's a few negatives involved over there, and you have to get to the bottom of exactly what they're trying to say there. Whereas I, because I sort of was trained in the Australian tradition, was trained to actually just be direct. Don't mess about, just blurt it out, saying, you sent me this last night, it was absolutely rubbish, I spent all night fixing it, can you please not do this again? So these are sort of the indirect communication styles. I can see why, if you actually gave that sort of feedback to someone straight up in perhaps outside of Australia, it would not be perceived very well. And I actually learned that with experience when I got to the Middle East. I think people's community status, both from a tenure and length of service in the organization. I mean, this is also very interesting. How long people have been in a particular organization actually tends to create particular biases, in terms of adoption of new behaviors, etc. So you need to appreciate that sort of stuff as well. Somebody who's new might be more open to new challenges. Somebody who's been there may or may not be. So you have to understand, that and consider that. Likewise, in certain cultures, titles and, what your title says is very, very important. People don't really focus too much about what your job function is. They're very, very mindful and driven by what their job title is. And it's very difficult to make somebody do something which is not, considered to be worthy of their job title, or not considered worthy of, what they perceive to be, their roles and responsibilities as a particular, title. Likewise, differences in social and network ties, play an important role. Who people might be friends with, what sort of social activities they have. I think these are all sort of important points to appreciate. Okay, so I thought at this time, I've been speaking and we are part of an English speaking club. So I might actually give some of our participants, perhaps one or two, the opportunity to actually tell me about what does a typical team in Kazakhstan look like? What is their view on what a typical team in Kazakhstan's like? Anybody brave enough to volunteer some info?
Everyone is welcome to just.
So if you just raise your hand, and then I think Danaya will do whatever magical she does to make you speak.
Okay, I think I'm the most not shy to start speaking.
Yeah.
I'll just have a benefit of the first reply for myself. I think that you were right about the homogeneous type of teams in Kazakhstan, but still Kazakhstan is quite a multicultural country, and usually people of different linguistic backgrounds, beliefs, and sometimes even origin. There are a lot of people who are historically coming from different countries, but ethnically they are, for example, Kazakhs, or their ancestors used to be a part of whatever was before Kazakhstan was an independent country. So I think a corporate team in Kazakhstan looks like something before a family. So we usually know about each other's families, the ongoing, whatever is going in their personal lives. and we are quite indirect, I would say. Even though we are not like people from the UK, we usually try to negotiate.
Okay, that's a very interesting perspective. I'm told that, you know, there is some appreciation that you need to have for people from Shymkent, because, you know, that might in itself cause, like, you know, a little bit of diversity within teams, like, you know, which is, you know, I mean, quite ironically, about, you know, 300 plus years, like, you know, before, I think my family actually came from somewhere around there originally. So, you know, I wonder how much of that inherent bias I actually still retain, you know, in my background, you know. Any other perspectives? Sure. Is it Mohammed?
Yes, thank you for giving a speech. My perspective on the typical work team in Kazakhstan is, yes, I agree that it's homogeneous. Most of them are Kazakhs, there are Russians, and there are some Uzbeks and Kyrgyz. But since they have the quite similar mentality, because we're post-Soviet countries, it's quite homogeneous, I can agree. But what I also noticed in a corporate team in Kazakhstan, when it comes to team building, not team building, it's just the everyday of the team. Women get along together. They go to lunch together. They have lunch together and just get along better together. And men just go separate together. That's they share a time for smoking or other time together. So it's like gender-based to me. And that's one thing I noticed. Another thing is that I don't think that there are like in team buildings or other negotiations. Yes, it does matter, but I can see some people sharing their opinions and beliefs and values directly, whether they believe in God or they are opposing against the current political situations in the world, or they're not against it, they're for it. Like it's people quite open in Kazakhstan about their personal life beliefs when they share it with their colleagues. So it's not discreet. So that's all.
Very interesting. Anybody else wanted to offer any perspectives on that? Two 96931.
I think the participant is not just aware that the mic is on.
Sure. I would have liked, like, you know, what and in itself is like, you know, what a wonderful way. I mean, nobody can pigeonhole or guess anything about you if you come across as a number. You know, it could, other than the fact that probably you're a bit mathematically minded, you know. Okay, now, like, you know, so that's, you know, some perspectives on, you know, what you thought that, you know, what a typical team looks like in Kazakhstan. For my part, I think I'd comment more on, you know, what a team looks like, for example, in US, Australia, UK. And I remember that, you know, one of the people that, you know, I sort of, you know, attended a presentation for, she actually presented her legal team's representation. So she worked for a large multinational corporate, and, you know, they had lawyers all over the world. And this is what, you know, she actually presented. This is Pernis, and, like, you know, and as you can see, you know, it is a very, like, you know, diverse group. I mean, you have, you know, they had big operations in, you know, for the Europe, etc. So they've got a lot of French-speaking German people. They've got, like, you know, Indians, Italians, Russians, Austrians, Ukrainians, Turkish, You know, they have big operations in Spain, so they have a lot of Spanish speaking people. And so this is the team that she manages. And this team is all over the world, speaking all different languages, come from all different biases. So you can see that her challenge will be to actually sell a common goal, like, you know, homogenize, create like, you know, common belief structures and improve effectiveness so you can, you know, buy into the organizational's delivery agenda, right? Whereas, like, you know, if you were dealing with like, you know, a team that was sort of more just, you know, didn't have that many divisions in it, then you might wish to approach this same issue a little bit differently because your challenge is a little bit different. It's more so sort of what international best practices you can bring to get the team to buy into. And some of them may be successful, some of them may not be successful, but, you know, that's the challenge. The other, like, you know, quite interesting thing is, like, you know, if you actually take pictures of, like, you know, the most average team, like, you know, for in the rest of the world, you will find that, you know, there is a lot of diversity that is demonstrated in their, team structure. You know, there is people of, you know, with different age groups. There are people of different, nationalities, backgrounds, language structures, and you have to deal with all of that, right? And sort of as lawyers, I don't know how many lawyers there are today in this group, but I mean, these are things that, for example, you also get trained on from the point of view of, you know, cross-examination. And I started in prosecution. So as an investigator, sometimes these things became quite relevant on how you addressed particular investigative questions and understanding motivations. You know, it's the psychology of crime and how to understand it, which these things also play a very important role. And when you talk to criminologists, they actually talk to you about, like, you know, these issues of diversity and how they interplay with, like, you know, the commission of particular offenses. So, I mean, those things became quite important as well. And some of the drivers, I mean, why people buy into the whole diversity debate, I mean, it's good for business performance. Like, you know, there is a lot of statistical studies that show that, you know, diverse teams perform much better than teams who are not diverse. You know, I did also do an econometrics degree, but I gave that up a long time ago. So I don't know how valid they are. But, you know, apparently people tell me that, you know, if you run those correlations, usually the T value is greater than 2. In terms of those, diversity factors that you put into them. And, then you have, you know, your stakeholder expectations. These days, large multinational companies operate in a world where their investors, their stock markets, you know, their regulators drive diversity. So in terms of just, you know, simple expectations management, being able to demonstrate that you're a diverse organization seems to be more important than it was yesterday. Also, from a market and reputation perspective, like, you know, if you actually have any adverse consequences or adverse outcomes based on diversity outcomes, then, you know, it's bad business because it is bad for your reputation. Once your reputation goes away, it's very difficult and takes a lot of time to fix it. So, you're better off actually working on increasing diversity within organizations and being able to demonstrate it to the broader populace than not. And also the regulatory landscape. I mean, in some countries, now there is some mandatory corporate disclosure that, for example, listed companies, et cetera, have to give on diversity, particularly diversity on boards in their corporate governance disclosures. And because of those reasons, it is now becoming an increasingly popular trend to, embrace diversity, shall we say, you know. I think what diversity does, it brings multiplicity of, like, you know, viewpoints and variety of personalities. And these can create like an invigorating environment that, you know, should spark innovation, creativity, and fresh thinking. Also, like, you know, people develop collaborative skills and learn new approaches and methods and, work together in terms of that. And I think it's also very important to have an appreciation as to what type of team you are. I mean, for example, like, if you are a team that is expected to give intellectual leadership to an organization, then, the type of people and personalities and drivers of that team, might need to be adjusted a little bit differently, or compared to, for example, if you were a sales team, you perhaps want a more outgoing, more interacting, function, and build that into the mix of your team, in terms of creating a little bit of diversity. Some important aspects, like, if organizations are to drive, implementation of diversity initiatives, I think some important things to appreciate it, like, there needs to be sort of tone from the top, like, you need to convince your board, your CEO, and all those people in terms of, like, how to incorporate some of these changes. You can look at, like, strategic partnerships, initiatives to increase your diversity plays within an organization. And I think at that point, I just wanted to pause and check with our attendees if any of them wanted to share any stories, for example, on if their organizations have a diversity plan, and what, for example, they have done to actually, partner or promote diversity within organizations. And it can be diversity from a professional angle or a gender angle, or, any particular aspect of diversity.
Sorry, did you mean that, did we observe such kind of diversity policies within the company?
Yeah, and if you wanted to share, for example, like, yours or some other company that you've observed in Kazakhstan that is, like, promoting diversity by partnering with particular organizations or partnering with universities, or perhaps there is, like, a women leadership award or something to that aspect to actually promote the objectives of diversity.
Yes, I can share. My alma mater, Nazarbayev University, they are trying to promote diversity, but it's not in terms of promoting diversity amongst employees, but student diversity. So what they're trying to do is to attract students from all over the world, and there are already good outcomes. Some of the students in master's degree, one student particularly only, who enrolled from Mexico, yeah, if I remember, and some of the Afghan students who enrolled into Nazarbayev University, and or how did they learn about it? I don't know quite well, but it's clear that it's through governments, like, since Nazarbayev University is heavily supported by the government of Kazakhstan, they're trying to promote the university through other governments. So I think that's the case. And I think it's a good thing to have diversity in the university, in corporate world, because it just adds up. I don't know, people get excited, I think, when people are excited to come to work and to work with different people. I think it improves the efficiency, productivity. I think when I was myself a student in Singapore only for one summer, and there were a lot of students from different parts of the world, and we were all excited to be together, and especially humanities majors, they're like all talkative and open-minded, and that was very positive, I think.
Yeah, I think very sort of important observations there as well. And then you can imagine that, I mean, when people are hiring managerial staff, for example, for a place like Singapore or a place like, any of the Middle Eastern financial centers, there is a little bit of commonality from being able to deal with diverse teams from a managerial skill set, which is common across those countries. There's always particular nuances of the individual countries as well. For example, how you work with the government and which might be a little bit different in different countries. But in terms of team management and being able to manage diversity as a manager, you can see that there's some commonalities between them. Because of the simple multitude of cultures that people have to put together and work towards a common goal. So I think that's a very valid observation, and often organizations partner a lot with universities, etc., in terms of being able to promote it. Anybody else who wanted to sort of volunteer any other stories?
Sorry, Ishaq, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You stress, focus on this subject. To me, it's like if I was a manager myself, I would have imagined it as a very exciting exciting position to have, because you're about to manage like different people from different cultures and backgrounds. But from I'm getting from the vibe of this conversation, it's sort of very hard, and you have to manage it, and you have to be knowledgeable. Am I getting the right vibe, or am
I think I wouldn't say it's hard. I think it's actually great to manage diversity, because what it does is not to blow a trumpet, but for example, the former team that at the QFC Authority actually won quite a few awards in terms of the best legal team by the Association of Corporate Counsel, and then also in the MENA region. So that's the broader Middle East and Northern Africa region: Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, UAE, Saudi, all those regions. It was actually voted the best legal team. And I think one of the strengths of that team was that there was not just the fact that there was really smart, brilliant people who worked together, but they were also diverse. And that meant that nothing went through without receiving multiple perspectives from professional, from various elements. Everybody brings their own perspective. And I think to leverage diversity, you have to encourage communication. You have to be open to listen to feedback. If I'm an authoritarian and a leader who discourages people from speaking up, then diversity is not really of much use to me, because I'm not really allowing anybody to really give their perspective. It's my perspective, and that goes, and I'm not open to views of the other people. Therefore, what's the benefit of diversity other than see a few different people just for optics? So I think that sort of is inherent in benefiting from diversity, that you have to be open to feedback. And if you're not, then you don't get benefit of diversity in your outcomes. And again, as I said, these are built with time, and as relationships between teams go stronger. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it is a difficult thing. I think the point is how to leverage and benefit from diversity rather than make it an issue saying, oh God, I have to manage diversity. It's really difficult, So I think that's sort of the benefit of diverse teams. I think that the reason why that particular team was really, really successful in being able to demonstrate international success and its outcomes was very much attributable to also their diversity as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, also, another aspect that I just wanted to raise, there's all these personality tests that people talk about, Myers-Briggs, type A, type B personality, all that. I actually think that, and quite interestingly, just this morning, in the financial, I don't know how many people read Financial Times or listen to Financial Times, but there was actually a podcast this morning about managing introverted personality teams, and I think the conclusion that, they sort of were getting to is that, perhaps it's also somewhat dangerous to do these tests and, put people in particular pigeonholes. I think it's important to appreciate that, certain people might be introverted or extroverted, or they might have a particular cultural bias in the way that they communicate. But at the same time, let's not lose sight of the fact that people are individuals. And you have to really appreciate that more, and rather than make someone saying, on your last test you were a type A personality, therefore I always expect that you will be very aggressive and non-detail focused, etc. These are some of the characteristics that you're led to believe that people have. But I think just from a team mix, it is important to appreciate that if you fill a team with everyone who wants to be a leader, then you might have some problems. And if you feel a team with people where nobody is willing to take any leadership or any responsibility, and everybody just wants to be detail focused, you might also have some problem as well. So it's good to sort of mix that. I think the other quite interesting thing is I enjoy giving people tasks which they don't feel comfortable with. Not a lot, but only a little bit. And I think the reason is that, I think personally I'm quite introverted. I'm not an extrovert. But with time, and training and mentorship of other bosses that I've worked with over the years, I have managed to train myself to be extroverted, at least in professional circumstances. And I think the reason is that, because of feedback, I realized that, maybe it's a type of my professional skill set that I have to work on and develop. And if somebody hadn't raised that, told me about it, and I hadn't appreciated the benefit of it, I probably would not have developed the skills, for example, to be able to speak to you, in publicly like this, or stand up in court and say, what you want to say. Those people can be quite daunting. I remember when I was early stage, we used to go to the federal court. There used to be a circuit where we used to get about this was part of the training process at the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, and you would just have a docket, say, open, you go, all these briefs are yours, and you would be given them a couple of days before. And also the person who used to preside those matters used to know this, and she would really tear you apart, in the process. But in that process, you were trying to do something that you didn't feel comfortable with in the first place, right? And that gives you new skill sets. So I think it's important to sort of know personality types from the team makeup, but it's also important to challenge people to actually do things that they might not necessarily feel comfortable with, if they're open to it. I mean, there has to be some buy-in from the other side as well. And I think that sort of helps people grow and also build new skill sets within the organization, I think also, an inherent bias sometimes you get is you find that, politics, becomes an excuse for people sometimes delivering bad work. You find that, this is also a cultural bias that I had not experienced this before coming out to the Middle East and, outside, is that, your work that you do is either good or bad. And sometimes people say, oh, but the reason why we went this particular way, because there was too much politics involved, and this was doing this, and this was doing something, and that's why this looks like the way it is. And I think that's a little bit of a cultural construct that you tend to appreciate with time in team management that you have to deal with. Skills and experience, and that I just want you to think of particularly from an English speaking perspective, right? There's 4 different concepts. So you have a number of years of work, number of years of relevant work, number of years in a similar workplace, and number of years of work in a similar job. Now, when you see a job description, often it, might talk a little bit about like, number of years experience, like, 8 years post-qualification experience, etc. Right? But to me, these 4 things are quite different. They're actually talking about quite different things. Like, the first one is talking about number of years of work, as in like how much experience have you got? I mean, you might have gotten that experience, for example, like waiting tables in a cafe, like I used to do as well. Or you might have gotten that experience as an international lawyer. I mean, it's basically just saying how long have you been in the workplace? How long are you used to taking instructions from other people and delivering on that mandate, right? Then there is number of years of relevant work. How long have you done something similar to this? Like, as in, or something that could be passported into this. Like, if you, for example, being an accountant in a big 4, there may be some parallels to sort of moving that across to being a supervisor that checks other people's financial statements, etc. So that's like, relevant work experience, and then you talk about how long have you worked in a similar workplace. Now that's asking completely different thing. That's asking you, an organization like mine, if I'm a multinational organization, how long have you worked for a multinational organization before? So in other words, it's a more cultural question. How used to are you to being able to deal with like, an organization like this? And then there is number of years of work in a similar job, which is exactly asking the question, you've done this job before? So I want to know if you've done this before, maybe your chances of doing it again and being successful in it are good. I am conscious that, we're coming towards the end of our hour. And I just wanted to give the opportunity to other people, because, as I said, this was an English speaking club, like, not a legal training session. So, if anybody within the group wants to express any views on the topic or ask any questions, I think it'll be useful to actually do that now. Yeah.
Actually, today, among the participants of the English Speaking Club, there are interns of our legal internship program.
Right.
We organized at the AFC Academy of Law, and they actually had some questions prepared for you as a managing director. So, guys, you're welcome.
That sounds a little bit. That sounds a little bit scary, Danaya.
I hope the questions are not as scary as my announcement was. Okay, Ainur, Fatima, Madina. Okay, I can see Fatima wants to ask a question. You may just turn on your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Fat.
Hello, Mr. Burney. To be honest, my question is not about like today's topic. My question is based on your experience in energy sector.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't mind, I have some questions. Well, sure. I guess my question is actually about the escalation of governmental regulations in favor of the integration of renewable resources. For instance, Spain today is considered to be a leading country in adoption of such regulations. But however, such position makes Spain become a defendant in many lawsuits related to violations of BITs and different energy agreements concluded between the receiving state and the investor or some company. So such uncertainty of governmental decisions causes the dissatisfactions from investors. So how do you think, is it actually a good position of a country to create such escalation?
Actually, I am speaking at the International Bar Association's annual Corporate Governance Conference on 19th and 20th September and in Frankfurt. And the topic of, like, you know, the discussion over there is actually culture and ESG. Like, you know, so it's you know, because, you know, in Frankfurt, they've launched a new body, which will be the new driver of accounting standards that, you know, will drive how people report on ESG. So when I compare sort of my experience I remember when IFRS, like, are you familiar with IFRS? Like, it's the financial reporting standards, right? So we used to have US GAAP, we used to have all these varying different standards for corporate reporting, right? And then came along, you know, and every country used to drive their own standards. And you know, of course, if I, you know, and I remember back in those days, appreciating differences between the various accounting standards was quite important, because which country you choose to do business in. So for example, if you did not want to report on particular write-offs or particular type of, like, you know, assets that, you know, were in trouble, then you could actually leverage different countries to actually decide which country you go to, and therefore to what extent, you know, they may or may not be disclosable, and how much your shareholders can quiz you about them, right? So I think the story for ESG will actually probably, in my view, evolve in the same way. You know, that at the moment, there is a lot of varying standards between governments in terms of, I want you to do this, or I want you to do this in my jurisdiction. And it is a lot of panning out to the voter base. You know, I mean, you know, in some of these countries, you know, maintaining voter support is very, very important. And you have to really play to the broader populace, and, you know, pollsters tell you what's popular, what's not popular. So of course, like, you know, environmental standards and ESG is very close to my heart, and this is something that should be rolled out broadly. But you have to appreciate that perhaps some politicians, etc., not always do this on with those drivers. Their drivers are a little bit different in such equations, right? Then there is this theory of called obsolescing bargain. Now, if you want to learn English, probably you want to go and read what that says in the dictionary, you know, obsolescing bargain theory. What that theory says is that when an investor comes into the market, their highest negotiating power is towards the start of the contractual relationship. So I'm making an investment today. I can actually tell the government, okay, listen, my reporting and my acquittals for my carbon credits, etc., will be this much. I'm not going to do more than that because this is all I can afford at the start. Is this acceptable to you? Government might say, okay, yes, that's fine. You know, why don't you make your investment, set up your factory, build your operations? And then guess what? Like, you know, as the nature of the relationship progresses, sometimes the relationship switches and the power base actually goes to the government, because now you're in the country, you've hired the people, you've started operations, you've sunk the money in, and now your ability to negotiate is a little bit different. And this is what you often see in these changing standards, like, you know, because countries taking advantage of that obsolescing bargain, you know, negotiating position, actually then drive new rules and regulations onto the investor, saying, you know, I know we said this, but, you know, it's a little bit changed. The new rules are this. Can you please start complying with this tomorrow? So it's a thing that is seen a lot. But, you know, there are some very interesting case examples. For example, I don't know if a company called YPF in Argentina, like, you know, there was a lot of, like, you know, changes, etc., driven by the government, and, you know, eventually the assets were repossessed, etc. But, you know, they have long-term economic impact on these countries as well. So yes, I mean, you can certainly drive the ESG for this, and there'll be a lot of variance between, you know, the various individual governments. But eventually, I see global standards evolving for ESG, which will then, you know, drive basically synchronization. So those that arbitrage or differences in different countries' views on this point will, with time, I think, synchronize into a global standard, which is pretty much sort of what has happened in the financial reporting debate as well. You know, so that's where I see, you know, that sort of debate going with the ESG standards as well.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer.
It was I must admit that question was a little bit left field, but luckily, you know, I'm read up on ESG, so I was able to answer it.
Okay, any more questions?
Hello, Mr. Burney and audience. To be honest, my question is not related to today's topic. Sorry for that, but anyway, I'd like to know about the licenses and what are the difficulties in obtaining a license, for example, in providing auxiliary services.
Okay, I would imagine that, you know, at the AIFC, it's not very difficult to obtain a license. We actually, you know, market ourselves on the ease in which you have to obtain licenses these days. But on that license, and particularly from an English language perspective, I think, you know, licensing in itself is often seen as a privilege. Right. So it's basically, I'm extending you the privilege of having a license, like, you know, where this is the giver of the license says to the person who receives the license, I'm extending you the privilege of, like, you know, having this license. It's not automatic, or it's not a right that, you know, by reason of existence, I automatically get a license. You know, you have to, in that earning that privilege, like, you know, you can ask a few questions and say, hey, you know, in extending this privilege to you, like, you know, do you think you might want to satisfy us about a few things as to why this privilege should be extended to you? The reverse side of this privilege is that, you know, when you extend a privilege, you can also take it away as well. So there is a whole body of law as to, you know, in what circumstances it's appropriate to take it away, or what happens, and what a decision-making process is, like, you know, in that. So I thought it'd be worthwhile in the context of today's session to actually also point that out. Now, second aspect of that is I think our licensing process, at least I consider to be, you know, very good, best in class licensing process at the AIFC. It is not very difficult to set up, like, you know, an ASP. Of course, there are some precursor matters because, you know, with time, you know, ASPs, or ancillary service providers, as they're called, have in many countries been used for, unfortunately, very nefarious outcomes. A very good example of that, like, you know, is a case that, you know, we had in Qatar right before, like, you know, I moved across, where, like, you know, an organization helped, you know, a drug cartel and an arms dealer laundered about you know, $70 million, or they attempted to launder about $70 million through, like, you know, the system in Qatar. And, you know, that was caught and it was prosecuted and the money was, like, you know, taken up. And this is a public case. It's called Horizon Crescent Wealth. If you ever feel like reading a judgment, you know, you can go to the QFC Court's website and actually, you know, have a read of that. But coming back to the question that you asked, is that, you know, there are some certain threshold issues which, like, you know, ASPs have to satisfy AIFC and AFSA, etc. We have a large number of companies already operating on the ASP front. Amongst the various obligations that we expect them to actually to be able to satisfy and meet are things like that. You know, that they have some sort of AML, etc. And this is not just that AFSA or AIFC is driving this. These organizations are now called DNFPBs, as in, like, you know, they are considered to be obligated from AML purposes, even though they're not financial services institutions. But the standards are a little bit lower than that of a financial services institution, because they can help other people, you know, engage in some pretty bad conduct. So I think those threshold issues often, you know, lead to a little bit of, like, you know, back and forth in terms of establishment of ASP licenses. But by and large, I think it is largely quite possible and quite easy to actually set up an ASP in the AIFC.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I don't see anyone wishing to ask a question. Oh, okay. Dauled.
Yeah, good day, everyone. Thank you, Ishaq, for your interesting lecture. Sorry, I would like to ask a question concerning your speech. You mentioned that you work in UK and Australia, and I would like to ask whether there is a really great difference between the approach of employers between UK employers and Kazakhstani employers, for example. What are the ways or maybe disadvantages to improve in Kazakhstani lawyers in their common approach? Thank you.
So, I mean, I have worked on a lot of UK-related matters, and I have studied in UK as well. But, you know, I haven't actually, so to say, been ever employed by a UK company, so to say. But I think I can certainly pass a pretty good comment in terms of working for an American company and an Australian company who I have actually worked for. I think it's a completely different world. Like, you know, it's like to draw such parallels would be, I think, wrong to apply those expectations, right? Because there is, for example, GE, General Electric, I worked for, is probably one of the best companies I have ever worked for in my life. I hands across my heart, I will always say that, no matter what anybody asks me ever, right? Because they had such amazing systems and processes developed over time, and appreciation for, you know, team building. I mean, it's just that everything in that organization worked very well. Like, you know, there was, it was quite clear what needed to be done, and you know, there was a very simple process and understood by everyone as to what needed to be done in that, right? And but you can see that, you know, the origins of General Electric are that Thomas Edison, you know, was involved in creation of GE. So there's hundreds and hundreds of years of, like, you know, sort of lead up to what happened in America that eventually saw a company like GE come about. And in the years that I used to work for, actually every year they used to win, like, you know, the world's most admired employer, most admired company in the Fortune 500 every year. Like, you know, for those years, it was just after Jack Welch and, you know, Jeff Immelt had taken over at that time, you know. Of course, with time, all companies have good and bad times. GE also had some good and bad times. But I think the importance is that there is historical constructs which lead to where organizations are in a particular period in their life. I think Kazakhstan is an extremely civil and open and moderate society in the way that, you know, the trajectory is going. I always give people an example, for example, that, you know, I think in particularly living in Nur Sultan, I find things to be very civil. Like, you know, when I cross the road, I step on the footpath, I find that most cars 90% of the time actually stop, you know, which probably is the good thing. You know, I don't think I can sometimes assume those things when I, for example, go to the Middle East or when I go to Spain. Like, you know, I think you still have to exercise a little bit of caution when, you know, crossing the road, because you're not 100% sure if the person's going to stop or not. But where I'm coming with this is that I think where Kazakhstan is heading towards, like, an internationalism trajectory and growing as a country, and, you know, the appreciation for international education, the very fact that we're having an English-speaking club meeting in Kazakhstan driven by something called the AIFC, I think are all positive indications of where things are going. And I think it's important to see it in this perspective. If you get too much hung up in, you know, where GE is at and where, for example, Halik Bank is at, and, you know, I think it's unfair to actually make those comparisons at this stage. But it's important to have objectives and trajectory right, so you know where things should go, and an appreciation for them. And then, you know, with effort, eventually given some time, you know, it's all going to get there.
Thank you for your answer. I got it.
Okay, Medina.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for your speech and the great presentation. And I have, I think, interesting question for you. It could be great if you could share tips on how to become a chief legal officer. Thank you.
Oh, that's a tough one. Listen, I actually don't know how to answer that question, to be honest. Like, you know, I think you have to be a good professional for a start. don't let the technical side drop. I mean, but then somewhere, because you see, the thing is, you get the opportunity because probably you were a good professional and you were good at, like, the core work. As in, like, if I'm thinking about how to become a restaurant manager, I probably should have a good understanding of how the kitchen works. I probably should have a good understanding of how to, serve the people, how to smile at them, give them good service, all that stuff, right? And then this will perhaps bring the skills to understand the kind of people that, I have to manage tomorrow. And I think being a good technical person or big professional, I mean, I'm just explaining my game plan to you, was very critical to me. I had to first show that I was good as a lawyer, and then got an opportunity to actually, lead teams, first smaller teams, then slightly bigger team, then bigger team, and eventually, like, bigger team. So I think that's important. But somewhere along the line, then you also have to change and grow as a person, because if you, for example, are very good at creating documents, then people expect saying, listen, I'm going to send this document to this guy and he's going to fix it. Don't worry about it, right? But somewhere along the line, you have to decide that I'm going to make the cut now, where I'm actually going to ask the person to say, can you kindly do this before sending it to me? And I think that's a personal challenge, and on how to grow from a technical profession to actually taking on some more leadership roles. By and large, like, I don't know if you know this, but lawyers make terrible managers. We don't have a reputation as an industry. And I say this having the benefit of being a very active member of the International Bar Association and also the Association for Corporate Counsel, that we don't actually make good managers, because some of us are too risk driven. Like, we just want to, like, and therefore we sometimes act as roadblocks in growth of businesses, So changing yourself and developing appreciations for, I suppose it comes back to that diversity angle, that, sales might have a different perspective on something compared to risk management. And, as a lawyer, you're not automatically siding with, like, risk management because you want to cut out all legal risk, but actually develop an appreciation for how to do that. And I think I sort of did that in my professional career by training as a regulator, but then moving to also the development arm. So for 6 years, I was the GC of the development arm of the Qatar Financial Center, the group entity. And in there, like, no longer just a regulatory perspective was enough. You also had to act as a facilitator. So I think you should be quite clear that, some things require you to act as, like, the lawyer and enforcer, and some things require you to act as a manager. And having that appreciation and being able to marry the two is perhaps an important aspect of, like, taking on broader leadership roles. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the last question from Aida Mukujanova.
Hi, everyone. Actually, I just want to support the topic of our today's session, Speaking Club, to support Easy on this, just to add some things. So my name is Aida. I'm from AFC Authority. I'm heading the legal support department here. I work in a diverse team and worked previously in PwC. And I can say I have a vast experience of working in diverse environment. And as a lawyer, I think that diversity at the workplace is presented in two broad forms: normative instruments and initiatives. And I absolutely agree with Izzy. In the world of work, these consist mainly of legislative and normative acts. So the normative documents can serve you to guide company policies, and they are referenced in other normative instruments and initiatives. They also standardize and coordinate approaches. In AFC, for example, we have AFC employment regulations, which specify discrimination provisions, and also AFC ethics code, which is promoted and adopted by the AFC governor, who is the implementer of AFC strategy. So what I would like to add to our topic today, managing diverse team successfully, there is one more approach which I think is worth to mention, is that the executives on behalf of the company employer, they must promote a culture of meritocracy, where great ideas come from all levels, genders and races, and all voices are welcome and respected around the table. And to do so, companies, employers must foster meritocracy, so hiring, rewarding, promoting the best people based only on their merit. As a result, the most progressive companies and the best experiences, international experiences, have created formal systems for ensuring that, for example, job applicants or employees are judged only solely by their efforts, skills, abilities, and performance, regardless of their gender, race, class, even national origin, or even sexual orientation. So I just would like to add about this meritocracy. So the students who are future lawyers, who will maybe in their further career will implement the policies within their workplace. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that perspective, Ada. And exactly, I think from the AIFC perspective, where we talk about us being representing international standards and driving change, and I think, not to blow our trumpet, but I think we do a pretty good job in terms of adopting and promoting issues of equality and prevention of discrimination and general adoption in our framework. And that also comes with the imbibing of sort of international standards in the AIFC's ethos, that we subscribe to international best practices in most things that we do. And this is exactly, I suppose, the point that an appreciation of this is in itself a very good marketing tool also for the AIFC when we talk about reputation and benefits of what it comes to actually promote issues of diversity and meritocracy within an organization. It's the likewise return recognition that it brings, be it from aspiring people who wish to work for the AIFC one day, or people who wish to deal with the AIFC as our participants.
Okay, many thanks for your comments and for answering questions and for actually giving us 1.5 hours of your work time today. We actually had many insights from your experience, not only in the AFC and as an employee building conduct policies that actually encourage diversity in big organizations. And thank you everyone for joining us today. You will find this recording on our YouTube channel as always. Thank you all. See you next time on our English Speaking Club September.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to thank Edana and Behboud for organizing this as well and taking this initiative. Very good initiative. Unfortunately, I just have not been able to attend any of the previous sessions. I did suggest a couple of speakers to you guys in the past, but actually, I think it's a very, very useful and initiative that has been taken by you guys. So please, by all means, carry it on. And if I can support in any way, from our side, just let me know, and I'll be happy to give you the support.
Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.